The crimson streaks ran down her carved wooden face like tears of blood, pooling at the base of the pedestal where generations had knelt in prayer. But the real miracle wasn't the desecration, it was what the Virgin Mary revealed through her wounds. Dawn broke grey over Harbourside, Maine, painting the fishing village in shades of fog and granite. The Atlantic crashed against the sea wall with its eternal rhythm, while seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries cutting through the salt-heavy air. Inside Our Lady of Sorrows Church the silence was absolute, the kind of silence that held centuries of whispered prayers and desperate pleas from fishermen's wives, from mothers whose sons went to war, from children seeking comfort from storms, both literal and spiritual. Grace Thompson had been the church custodian for 37 years, longer than some parishioners had been alive. At 72, her hands were gnarled by arthritis, but she still arrived every Sunday at 5 a.m. to prepare for morning mass, just as she'd promised Father O'Brien back in 1986. This particular Sunday, her broom clattered to the marble floor before she'd taken 3 steps inside. The statue of the Virgin Mary, carved from Italian walnut in 1847 by a master craftsman whose name had been lost to history, bore wounds that made Grace's breath stop in her throat. Deep gashes scored the figure's face and torso, the blade marks so violent they seemed to pulse with malice. But worse than the damage itself was what covered the wounds, a substance that looked horrifyingly like fresh blood, still wet enough to catch the coloured light filtering through the stained glass windows. Grace's scream shattered the sacred silence. If you're enjoying this already, smash like, subscribe, and most importantly, give this video a hype. And I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country down in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Within minutes, the church courtyard transformed into chaos. Parishioners abandoned their Sunday morning rituals, coffee cooling on kitchen tables, children's hair half-combed. Drawn by the pealing bells and spreading horror, they came in bathrobes and fishing gear, in their finest mass clothes and work boots still crusted with yesterday's catch. Thomas Brennan, 84 years old and the town's unofficial historian, pushed through the crowd with his walker, his weathered face draining of colour when he saw the desecrated statue. "In all my years," he whispered, "through wars and storms and all the troubles this town has seen, nothing like this. Nothing." Younger voices rose in anger. "It's those kids from Portland," shouted Danny Chen, a third-generation lobsterman whose traps had been vandalized twice in the past month. "Coming here with their drugs and their disrespect." "Or maybe it's the newcomers," hissed Margaret Walsh, her rosary beads clicking frantically through her fingers. "All these outsiders moving in, taking our jobs, bringing their different ways." Father Anthony Novak arrived breathless, his salt and pepper hair dishevelled from sleep. At 46, he'd served Harbourside for 12 years, navigating the tensions between old families and new arrivals with the diplomatic skill of someone who genuinely loved his fractured flock. But nothing in seminary had prepared him for this. He moved through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea, his black cassock billowing behind him. When he reached the statue, he dropped to his knees on the cold marble, pressing his hand to the damaged wood as if taking the Virgin's pulse. The blood was still tacky to the touch. Father Novak's lips moved in silent prayer, but his eyes held a fear deeper than simple vandalism. This felt personal, targeted, a deliberate strike at the heart of everything Harbourside believed in. The wail of sirens announced Detective Ryan Cole's arrival. The squad car's lights painted the church's stone walls in alternating red and blue, giving the scene the surreal quality of a fever dream. Ryan emerged from the vehicle with the controlled urgency of someone used to violence, his 6-foot frame radiating the kind of authority that came from 15 years of law enforcement. But those who'd known him longer remembered a different Ryan, the boy who'd served as an altar server here, whose mother had lit candles at this very statue every Friday evening, whose faith had died alongside his parents in a fishing accident that no amount of prayer had prevented. "This is a crime scene, Grudsin," Ryan announced, his voice carrying the flat affect of professional detachment. "Nobody touches anything. Nobody leaves until we've taken statements." As he cordoned off the altar with yellow tape, his eyes met Father Novak's. The priest saw something flicker in Ryan's expression, not quite pain, not quite recognition, but something that suggested old wounds never fully healed. Grace Thompson, still trembling from her discovery, approached Ryan with the mixture of motherly concern and moral authority that only elderly church ladies could muster. "Ryan Cole, your mother would be heartbroken to see you've stayed away from church all these years, but I suppose the Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing you back like this." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Thompson, I need you to tell me exactly what you saw when you entered the church this morning." As Grace described her discovery in halting detail, Ryan photographed the scene with clinical precision, but his hands weren't quite steady as he documented the damage to the statue his mother had prayed before countless times, begging the Virgin to keep his father safe on the dangerous Atlantic waters. The prayers hadn't worked then. Ryan doubted they'd work now. What he didn't know was that the desecration before him was only the beginning of a mystery that would force him to confront not just a crime, but the faith he'd spent 15 years trying to bury. By noon, Harbourside had fractured into armed camps, each convinced they knew the guilty party. At Murphy's Diner, the town's unofficial centre of gossip and speculation, the Sunday lunch crowd devolved into something approaching warfare. "It's those Martinez kids, I'm telling you," insisted Frank Donnelly, slamming his coffee mug hard enough to splash liquid across the Formica counter. "Coming here from God knows where, taking jobs from local boys, and now this." Across the room, Rosa Martinez bristled. "My nephews work harder than your lazy son ever has, Frank. They didn't slash anything except your inflated sense of entitlement." The diner fell silent. Rosa was a force of nature. A Puerto Rican immigrant who'd arrived in Harbourside 30 years ago, married a local fisherman, buried him at sea when his boat went down in a nor'easter, and raised 3 children alone while running the town's most successful fish processing business. Nobody questioned Rosa Martinez lightly. "I'm just saying," Frank backpedaled, his face reddening. "There's been trouble ever since people started moving here who don't understand our ways, our traditions." "Traditions?" Rosa's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "You mean your comfortable prejudices? Because I remember when our ways meant keeping the Irish and the Italians and everyone else who wasn't Mayflower stock in their place." Father Novak, nursing black coffee in a corner booth, watched the confrontation with growing dread. The statue's desecration had ripped open wounds he'd spent years trying to heal. Harbourside had always harboured tensions, old families versus newcomers, wealthy summer residents versus year-round workers, the faithful versus the sceptical, but those divisions had remained mostly civil, until now. At the harbour, where lobster boats bobbed in their slips and the smell of diesel mixed with brine, the arguments grew more heated. Carlos Alvarez, 23 years old and Rosa's nephew, found himself surrounded by 3 older fishermen whose weathered faces showed no kindness. "We know it was you," spat Jimmy O'Brien, blocking Carlos's path to his uncle's boat. "You and your punk friends, probably high on something, thinking it's funny to attack what's sacred to us." Carlos's hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to breathe deeply. "I was at my girlfriend's house in Portland last night. I've got witnesses. Now get out of my way. I've got traps to check." "Convenient alibi," sneered another fisherman. "Just like how you conveniently found all those damaged traps that mysteriously ended up being yours. Maybe you're damaging your own equipment to collect insurance, or maybe you're just lying about everything." The confrontation might have escalated into violence if Detective Cole hadn't chosen that moment to walk down the pier, his presence enough to disperse the crowd with muttered curses and suspicious glares. Ryan pulled Carlos aside. "I need you to come down to the station, just to talk." "About what?" "I didn't do anything." "I know, but you're going to need to prove that, officially." "And Carlos?" Ryan's voice dropped lower. "Watch your back. This town's looking for someone to blame, and you're an easy target." Back at the station, Ryan studied the evidence spread across his desk. Crime scene photos showed the statue's wounds in brutal detail. The blood was still being analysed, but preliminary tests suggested it was actual blood, human blood, O-positive, mixed with some kind of resin to make it flow more dramatically. The violence of the attack suggested rage, but the theatrical element, the staged bleeding, indicated calculation. Someone had wanted this to look like a sign, a warning, a judgment from heaven itself. But who? And why? His phone buzzed with a text from the lab. "Preliminary DNA results available. You need to see this." Ryan Cole sat alone in his apartment above the hardware store on Main Street, surrounded by cardboard boxes he'd never fully unpacked, despite living there for 5 years. The walls were bare except for his college diploma and police academy graduation certificate. No family photos, no personal touches, nothing that might remind him of what he'd lost. On his kitchen table lay his mother's rosary, the beads worn smooth from decades of use. He'd found it among her belongings after the accident, still clutched in her dead hand as if prayer could somehow have saved her from drowning. It couldn't. Ryan had been 17 when the Mary Catherine, his father's lobster boat, named for Ryan's mother, went down in a freak storm. The Coast Guard said they'd responded within minutes of the distress call, said the waves were 40 feet high, the wind sustained at 70 knots, conditions that would have capsized anything smaller than a destroyer. Said there was nothing anyone could have done, but Ryan's mother had believed, had prayed to that statue every single Friday evening for 27 years, lighting candles and whispering pleas for his father's safe return, had taught Ryan the same prayers, the same rituals, the same absolute faith that God was watching over them. The night of the accident, Mary Catherine Cole had been at the church kneeling before the Virgin Mary statue when word came that the boat was in trouble. Witnesses said she'd gripped the statue's base so hard her knuckles went white, her prayers becoming almost violent in their desperation. The Mary Catherine sank with all hands aboard. Ryan's father and 2 crew members were lost to the Atlantic's cold embrace, and his mother, who'd made it to the dock just in time to watch the Coast Guard bring back nothing but wreckage, had collapsed with a heart attack 3 hours later. At 17, Ryan Cole became an orphan, inheriting nothing but a modest life insurance policy, a paid-off house he couldn't bear to live in, and a fury at a God who ignored desperate prayers. Now, 15 years later, he was investigating an attack on the very statue that had failed his family. The irony was so sharp, it drew blood. His phone rang. The lab. "Detective Cole, you're going to want to hear this." The forensic tech's voice carried excitement tinged with confusion. "The blood on the statue, we ran it through CODIS. We got a hit." Ryan sat forward. "Who?" "That's the weird part. The DNA matches Carlos Alvarez, but there's something else. We found traces of a second substance mixed with the blood, a commercial wood resin used in boat repair. And when we tested the fabric fibers caught in the statue's wood, they don't match anything Alvarez owns." "Explain." "Someone took Alvarez's blood, probably from a medical waste facility or donation centre, and mixed it with resin to make it flow properly. Then they used it to stage the scene, making it look like whoever slashed the statue bled on it. It's a frame job, detective. And a sophisticated one." Ryan's mind raced. Who would have access to medical waste? And who would know enough about forensics to try framing someone this way? "That's your department, but whoever did this wanted us to focus on Alvarez while they got away with something else." After hanging up, Ryan stared at the rosary on his table. His mother's voice echoed in memory. "God works in mysterious ways, Ryan. Sometimes we don't see his plan until much later." He'd stopped believing in divine plans after watching the Coast Guard pull his parents' bodies from the Atlantic. But now, looking at evidence that suggested a conspiracy far more complex than simple vandalism, he felt the first stirrings of something he couldn't quite name. Not faith, not yet, but maybe curiosity about whether his mother might have been right about mysteries that transcended simple cause and effect. He grabbed his jacket. Time to take another look at that church. The church was dark when Ryan arrived at 11:47 p.m., his flashlight cutting through shadows that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. He'd told dispatch he was securing the crime scene, but truthfully, he'd been drawn back by instinct, the kind of gut feeling that had saved his life twice during his years in Portland's gang unit. Something about this case felt incomplete, like a puzzle with pieces still hidden in the box. The statue loomed in his flashlight beam, her scarred face somehow more disturbing in the darkness. Ryan had seen plenty of violence in his career. Bodies in dumpsters, victims of domestic rage, the casual cruelty humans inflicted on each other daily. But this felt different, personal. He walked the perimeter of the altar, photographing from angles the crime scene techs might have missed. As he knelt to examine the base of the pedestal, his flashlight flickered and died. "Damn batteries," Ryan muttered, shaking the light. It flickered back to life for just a moment, long enough for him to see something impossible. The statue was glowing, not the whole figure, but specific spots, a faint bluish luminescence emanating from the wooden base, forming a pattern that looked almost like an arrow, pointing towards the side chapel. Ryan's rational mind screamed that it was reflection, moonlight through stained glass, some trick of exhaustion and stress. But his mother's voice whispered in memory, "She watches over us, Ryan. Always." He followed the direction the glow seemed to indicate, his heart hammering against his ribs. The side chapel was a small alcove where parishioners lit votive candles for intentions, healing, safe travels, the repose of souls. In the darkness, Ryan stumbled over something, nearly falling. His flashlight caught what had tripped him, a heavy duffel bag, hidden behind a rack of prayer candles. Ryan pulled on latex gloves and unzipped it. Inside, bundles of cash, hundreds of thousands of dollars by quick estimate, along with ledgers, USB drives, and a half-dozen cell phones still in their packaging. This wasn't petty crime proceeds. This was organised crime. Serious money. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Stop investigating, or you'll end up like your parents. The sea takes everyone eventually." Ryan's blood turned to ice. The accident had been ruled exactly that. An accident. Freak storm, bad luck, wrong place at wrong time. But what if? A sound behind him. Ryan spun, hand moving to his weapon, but he wasn't fast enough. Something hard struck the back of his skull, and the world went black as he fell forward into the duffel bag, full of blood money. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness took him was the statue's face, lit by a single votive candle, her expression somehow shifting from sorrow to what looked almost like determination. Ryan woke to Father Novak's worried face hovering above him, the priest's hands gentle as he checked the lump on the detective's head. Early morning light streamed through the stained glass, painting everything in apocalyptic reds and golds. "Easy," Father Novak said. "You took quite a hit. The paramedics are on their way." "The bag," Ryan croaked. "Did you see it?" "Gone when I found you, but I saw something else." The priest helped Ryan sit up against a pew. "Security footage. I had the church wired after the break-ins last year, but I never told anyone. Didn't want people to think I didn't trust them." His smile was rueful. "Turns out I was right not to trust everyone." He pulled out a laptop, queuing up grainy footage. Ryan watched as figures in dark clothes entered the church through a side door, a door that should have been locked. They moved with purpose toward the statue, and the timestamp showed this was hours before the desecration was discovered. "Wait," Ryan said. "Go back." Father Novak rewound. One of the figures turned briefly towards the camera, face partially visible in the dim light. Ryan's breath caught. "That's Jimmy O'Brien, the fisherman who was harassing Carlos at the harbour." "There's more." Father Novak fast-forwarded to show a second visit, this one after the statue was slashed. The same figures returned, but this time carrying something, a duffel bag matching the one Ryan had found. They used the church as a drop point, Ryan realised. The whole desecration was a diversion. While everyone was focused on the statue, they were running smuggling operations right under our noses. Smuggling what? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. Ryan stood despite the throbbing in his skull. "Father, I need you to keep this footage safe. Don't tell anyone you have it, and whatever you do, don't go near the harbour alone." As paramedics arrived to check Ryan for concussion, Father Novak pulled him aside one more time. "Detective, there's something else you should know. The glow you saw, that wasn't your imagination. I've seen it too, twice before. Once when my own faith was being tested, and once when Mrs. Rodriguez's grandson was dying of cancer. Both times, the statue seemed to guide us, show us things we needed to see." Ryan wanted to dismiss it as religious fervour, but he couldn't, not after what he'd experienced. "What are you saying, Father?" "I'm saying maybe your mother was right. Maybe we're not alone in this fight." 3 hours later, Ryan stood in the office of Mayor Patricia Knowles, laying out what he'd discovered. The mayor, a no-nonsense woman who'd built her political career on cleaning up coastal Maine's smuggling problem, listened with growing horror. "You're telling me someone's been using Our Lady of Sorrows as a criminal enterprise?" "More than that. I think they've been using it for months, maybe years. The boat vandalism, the missing traps, even some of the tensions between old families and newcomers. I think it's all been engineered to keep people distracted and divided while a smuggling ring operates freely." Mayor Knowles pulled up files on her computer. "We've had reports of unusual maritime traffic, boats that don't file proper manifests, cargo containers that arrive without proper documentation, but every time we investigate, the evidence disappears. Because someone's been protecting them from inside. Someone with access to police reports, investigation schedules, everything. Ryan's jaw tightened. We need to set a trap. What kind of trap? The kind that uses faith as a weapon, but first I need to talk to Carlos Alvarez. Carlos Alvarez sat in the interview room, his young face hardened by exhaustion and fear. Ryan could see his mother Rosa through the observation window, her expression fierce with protective fury. I didn't slash that statue, Carlos said, for what must have been the 20th time. But I know who did. Ryan leaned forward. Talk to me. About 2 months ago I was working late at the processing plant. I saw Jimmy O'Brien and 2 other guys loading crates onto a boat at 2 a.m. Crates that didn't match anything we'd processed that day. When Jimmy saw me watching, he told me to mind my own business unless I wanted to end up like my uncle. And my uncle drowned 5 years ago in what everyone said was an accident. Did you report this? To who? Jimmy's cousin is a deputy sheriff. The harbour master is Jimmy's brother-in-law. Everyone in power here is connected to the O'Brien family somehow. Carlos's voice cracked. So I kept quiet. But then my blood turns up at the church, and I realised they've been planning this for months. They needed a fall guy, and I was perfect. Young, Latino, not from an old family. Easy to blame. Ryan showed Carlos the security footage. Can you identify the other men with Jimmy? Carlos studied the screen, his expression growing darker. That's Paul Chen, runs the fish market, and that one looks like... No, it can't be. Who? Deputy Tom Walsh. He's the one who took my statement about the vandalized traps. Carlos looked up at Ryan. They'd been investigating themselves this whole time. The pieces clicked into place. A conspiracy that reached into law enforcement, protected by family connections and exploiting community divisions. They'd used the statue desecration as cover for moving a major shipment, framing Carlos to remove a witness who'd seen too much. But they hadn't counted on security cameras or a detective who no longer trusted obvious answers. Ryan made a decision that would either solve the case or destroy his career. Carlos, I need you to do something dangerous. I need you to let yourself be arrested publicly for the statue attack. Let them think they've won. Are you insane? Maybe. But it's the only way to draw them out. They'll think they're safe, that their frame job worked. That's when they'll make the real move, the one we'll be waiting for. Through the observation window, Rosa Martinez knocked urgently. When Ryan stepped out, her eyes were blazing. You're going to use my nephew as bait? With his consent, yes, and with every protection I can provide. Rosa studied him for a long moment. Your mother was a good woman. She prayed for my husband when he was lost at sea. Lit candles every week for a year afterward. She believed the Virgin Mary heard every prayer, even when it looked like they went unanswered. My mother died praying, Ryan said flatly. No, detective. Your mother died faithful. There's a difference. Rosa gripped his arm. Sometimes prayers are answered in ways we don't expect. Sometimes justice comes disguised as tragedy, and grace appears in the darkest moments. You protect my Carlos, and maybe you'll understand what your mother knew all along. That night, Carlos Alvarez was arrested in a public spectacle at Murphy's Diner, with cameras rolling and half the town watching. Frank Donnelly and his allies cheered. Rosa Martinez played her part perfectly, screaming at the officers, swearing her nephew's innocence, making it all look authentic. Only a handful of people knew what it was theatre, designed to make criminals comfortable enough to show their hand. In his apartment, Ryan knelt for the first time in 15 years, not quite praying, but not quite dismissing prayer either. His mother's rosary was cool in his hands. If you're listening, he said, to whatever might exist beyond the ceiling, we could use some help here. Not for me, for them, for this town. The rosary beads seemed to warm slightly in his palm, but Ryan told himself it was just body heat, just physics, nothing more. He almost believed it. The trap was set for the following Saturday, when most of Harbourside would be at the annual Fisherman's Memorial Service, a solemn ceremony honouring those lost to the sea. Ryan had leaked information through a deputy he suspected of being compromised. Carlos was being transferred to county lockup that evening, the church would be empty, and the investigation was winding down with Carlos's arrest, making everyone comfortable. Father Novak had agreed to leave the church accessible, the security system temporarily disabled to make entry easy. In reality, every corner was covered by hidden cameras and plainclothes officers from the state police, called in specifically because Ryan no longer trusted local law enforcement. Ryan positioned himself in the bell tower at 9 p.m, with a clear view of the church courtyard and side entrance. His radio crackled softly as teams confirmed their positions. "All units in place," came the voice of Captain Morris from the state police. "Now we wait." They didn't wait long. At 9:47 p.m, a panel van pulled up to the side entrance. Jimmy O'Brien emerged first, followed by Paul Chen and Deputy Walsh. They moved with the confidence of men who believed they'd already won, carrying heavy duffel bags toward the church. "Hold positions," Ryan whispered into his radio. "Let them get inside. I want them caught with the evidence." But as the smugglers disappeared through the side door, something happened that made Ryan's blood run cold. A fourth figure appeared from the shadows. Someone Ryan recognized immediately. Mayor Patricia Knowles. "Abort!" Ryan hissed into the radio. "Do not engage. The mayor is compromised. I repeat, the mayor is—" His transmission was cut off by Mayor Knowles' voice, amplified through a bullhorn. "Detective Cole, I know you're in the bell tower. We've had the church surrounded for the past 10 minutes. Your state police friends are in custody, and you're going to come down now, or I'll have this entire building burned to the ground." Ryan's mind raced. How had they known? Who'd leaked the operation? The answer clicked into place with sickening clarity. The deputy he'd deliberately fed false information to gauge whether there was a leak. Deputy Walsh had been playing him from the start, feeding carefully crafted misinformation back to Ryan while warning the conspiracy of the real plan. He was trapped. "You have 30 seconds, detective," Mayor Knowles shouted. "After that, I light a match." Ryan looked down at his mother's rosary, still in his pocket. For 15 years he'd treated it as a meaningless relic, a reminder of faith that had failed. But now, with his options exhausted and his backup captured, he found his hand reaching for it. The beads were warm, not body temperature warm, genuinely warm, as if they'd been sitting in sunlight. And then he saw it again, the glow from the Virgin Mary statue, visible even from the bell tower. But this time, the luminescence wasn't showing him where to look. It was showing him a path. The glow traced a line across the church roof toward the sacristy, where an old priest's escape route, built during the Know-Nothing riots of the 1850s, led through a tunnel to the harbour. Ryan had heard rumours of the tunnel as a child, but assumed it was legend. Now, with light that couldn't possibly be moonlight marking the exact route, he made a choice that would have been impossible for the man he'd been 2 weeks ago. He trusted what he couldn't explain. Moving quickly, Ryan followed the glowing path across the roofline, his police training keeping him silent despite his pounding heart. Behind him, he heard Mayor Knowles ordering her people to storm the bell tower. The entrance to the priest's tunnel was exactly where the glow indicated, hidden behind a loose stone in the sacristy wall. Ryan squeezed through just as he heard boots thundering up the bell tower stairs. The tunnel was barely wider than his shoulders, damp with century-old moisture and black as pitch, but ahead, impossibly, he could see the same faint blue glow, marking the way like emergency lighting in a crashed aircraft. His mother's voice echoed in memory. "She watches over us, Ryan. Always." For the first time since he was 17, Ryan Cole whispered a prayer. "Help me finish this." The glow brightened, just for a moment, as if in answer. Ryan emerged from the tunnel in the crypt beneath the harbour master's office, a location that told him exactly how deep the conspiracy ran. The harbour master himself had been part of it, providing cover for illegal shipments and coordinating schedules to avoid detection. He was also lying on the crypt floor, very dead, with a bullet wound in his chest and a look of surprise frozen on his face. Ryan's hand moved to his weapon as he scanned the shadows. The killer couldn't be far. "Don't move." The voice came from behind him, accompanied by the distinctive sound of a gun being cocked. "Hands where I can see them, detective." Ryan turned slowly to find Father Novak pointing a pistol at his chest. "Father?" The betrayal cut deeper than any bullet could have. "I'm sorry it has to be this way, Ryan." The priest's hands were steady, his expression genuinely regretful. "Your mother was right about so many things. She just didn't know that sometimes we have to make deals with devils to survive. The smuggling operation, it was yours all along. Ours. The mayor, the harbour master, Jimmy and his crew, even some of your fellow officers. Do you know what parishes receive in donations anymore, detective? We were barely keeping the lights on. The roof leaked. The boiler died every winter. I watched families leave for bigger cities, while our congregation shrank to a handful of old people. So, you turned to crime, used the church as a front?" Father Novak's laugh was bitter. "I turned to survival. The first shipment was 3 years ago. Just some electronics that bypassed import taxes. The money fixed the roof, replaced the boiler, funded programs for kids who needed them. I told myself it was the lesser evil. And when that wasn't enough, you escalated until you were running a full smuggling operation worth millions. The church is holy ground, Ryan. Who would suspect it? We had the perfect cover until Carlos saw too much. The statue desecration. That was Jimmy's idea. Crude but effective. Frame the kid, distract everyone with religious outrage, move the shipment while the whole town tore itself apart. Ryan's mind worked furiously, buying time. But something went wrong. The harbour master got greedy. He wanted a bigger cut, threatened to go to the FBI. Father Novak gestured at the body. Mayor Knowles handled it. She's always been better at the necessary violence than I am. The Virgin Mary statue, Ryan said suddenly. The glow I saw. You saw it too. For the first time, Father Novak's composure cracked. That's impossible. There's no such thing as... But you did see it. That's why you looked so shaken when I asked about security footage, because you saw something you couldn't explain away, even after years of using faith as cover for crime. The priest's gun wavered slightly. Stress, exhaustion, the mind plays tricks. My mother wasn't wrong, Ryan interrupted. About faith, about prayer, about the Virgin Mary watching over us. She was just wrong about the timing. Her prayers were answered, Father, just 15 years late, and in ways she never could have imagined. Shut up! The gun steadied again. I don't have time for your mother's religious delusions. The mayor and her people are above us right now, and we're going to walk out together. You're going to tell them the operation was compromised, and everyone should scatter. Then I'm going to disappear with enough money to live well somewhere. The church's reach doesn't extend. Except the church's reach extends everywhere, said a new voice from the tunnel opening, especially for those who desecrate it. Rosa Martinez emerged, followed by Carlos and, impossibly, Captain Morris and 3 state police officers, all very much not in custody. The leak worked perfectly, Captain Morris said, lowering his weapon at Father Novak. Thanks for telling Deputy Walsh about your fake trap, Detective Cole. It flushed out everyone who thought they'd caught us with our own plan. Ryan's mind reeled. I don't understand. The mayor is in custody, along with Jimmy O'Brien and 6 others, Carlos said. We let them think they'd won. Let them relax enough to coordinate over their phones. Everything's recorded. But Father Novak said... He said what he needed to keep you talking until we arrived. Captain Morris approached the priest carefully. Father, the gun. Please. You've done enough damage. For a moment, Ryan thought the priest might resist. Then Father Novak lowered his weapon, his face crumbling into genuine grief. I just wanted to save the church, the building, the community, everything I'd dedicated my life to. Is that so wrong? Using sacred space to facilitate crime? Yes, Father, that's wrong. Ryan stepped forward, accepting the gun and carefully securing it. But maybe some prayers are still answered, even for people who've lost their way. As state police led Father Novak away in handcuffs, Rosa approached Ryan, her weathered face soft with understanding. Your mother's faith wasn't wasted, Detective. It just took root in you deeper than you knew. You trusted what you couldn't explain, because somewhere inside, you remembered her lessons. Ryan looked back toward the church, where he could just barely see the Virgin Mary statue through a high window. The glow was gone, if it had ever really been there, but the warmth of his mother's rosary in his pocket remained, real and undeniable.